So in this example, I'm going to demonstrate some interactive application development with Lively for Qt. And let me first begin by taking some of these objects and moving them into a subworld. And I'm going to drag this guy through a wormhole. And I'm also going to get this guy from here and also drag it to the subworld. So now we have it here. And let me first build a simple bus-like thing here. First of all, reset transformations, so we have the rectangle in its normal position. Let me make a copy of that little red ellipse and then put it here. And then I'm also going to make another copy and put it here. So now we have this little structure that looks like a car. And the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to open a tool called the Evaluator, which allows me to enter JavaScript code. And I can basically type any code I like here. And now what I'm going to do is that I'm actually pasting this code from another place. Let me see. Well, first of all, let's clear the evaluator, and let's create a reference to the bus structure. So we use a pointer called that, which basically gives me a reference to the structure that I clicked with the mouse last. And in this case, I click this guy here. Now if I evaluate that, I actually have a reference to the bus. And let me just show that that reference is active. So let me say something like rotate, bus rotate by 10 degrees decimal. And that's now what it would do. And let's reverse. We don't want to keep it in that position, so let's put it back. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to define a little timer and a function that will move that guy there. And I'm pasting this from another place. So basically, in this first line here, I'm creating a timer called timer, which will hold an instance of class QTimer. And then I'm defining a JavaScript function called step that actually is defined to move the bus horizontally by 3 each time it's called. And then let me also add the connect function that will define the connection. Let me make this guy a little bigger. So now we are basically defining here the function called step, and then we are creating a connection between the timer and the step function. And in this case, I will be calling the start function every 20 milliseconds. And now if I evaluate this guy, you'll notice that this thing here will start moving relatively rapidly. And it would go away from the screen unless I grab it quickly. And the only way for me to stop that would be to say something like timer stop fast enough. Okay, so now we got it. And I could basically start it again by saying something like, let's make it go a little bit slower now. Every 200 milliseconds, 5 times per second. So anyway, so this is a really trivial example. Let me stop that guy now. Stop. Okay, like that. And now let's build something more interesting. So I'm going to use the world menu, the background menu, to create a few simple objects first. Let me create a simple rectangle here. And now I'm going to instantiate a few Q widgets. One of them will be a line edit component that basically allows me to edit arbitrary text. And I'm putting it here. And let's make it a little bit larger. And then I'm also creating a push button object, and I'm placing it next to the line editor. And basically, I could be using layouts here if I wanted to. The Qt library has very flexible layout management mechanisms. Anyway, the third object that I'm going to create is a QWebView component, which is basically a full-fledged web browser that can be instantiated from the Lively system, and I'm making it a little bit smaller in this case. So we have here now is basically a live web browser. Just to illustrate that it's actually live, let me click on some of these links and it'll get updated. So anyway, now although this looks kind of like a little web browser, we don't have the necessary connections between the URL bar here and the push button here. So basically I need to create the necessary connections, and first of all I'm going to bring this evaluator guy back so that I can actually do what I want to do. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take references to all these widgets, Q widgets that I have here. So first of all, let me get a pointer to the line edit component. Yeah, it will be put in a global variable called myline. And likewise, I'm going to do the same for the other structures. So I'm going to take a reference to the button, and then I also take a reference to the browser Q web view component here. Alright, so now I have that. And the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a function called load page, which will actually take the value from the URL, from the URL field here, the line edit field here. And I'm just going to read the definition here. I pasted it from my text editor. So we define a function called load page, which is basically getting the inner value of the Q widget that's placed in the line widget component here. And if you look at Qt documentation, you'll notice that the line edit component has a field called text, which holds the text that's currently in the line edit component. And then I'm creating a QURL object, which I'm then giving as a parameter to the browser QWebView instance. And again, I need to access its internal behavior through its inner variable. So I'm basically giving the URL parameter to my browser. And here, finally, I'm creating a connection between the button and the load page function. So now, if I press evaluate, the connection gets created, and now I can actually put this guy away. I don't really need it, so let me just minimize it. And now if I type a valid URL here, I can basically get something like, well, let's say usatoday.com, and then press push me, and you'll see that we have a fully functional web browser now. And if I went further, if I defined the functionality for things like copying, I could basically interactively define the functionality to create copies of these objects that I have just created. In this case, I can get a copy of all the structures, but the functionality associated with each of these components and the values don't get copied unless I explicitly define the copy function. So that gives you a brief example of the interactive development style with Lively for Qt. Of course, you can also use conventional text files and load them to the system.